Cool, thank you. Welcome all to another tools call. This call was actually meant to happen 3 weeks ago, but I had a calendar slip up and I was actually at KubeCon, so I couldn't run that. And we also had a pretty empty agenda, so I don't think it was a huge loss. But anyway, on to the first section, ID/editor/tools, although this section should probably rename at this point. The first point is mine. This point used to be, is there an update for this issue? And then Robert did reply in the thread, but just wanted to echo that I'm looking forward to testing alias support in export data for the compiler. I'm not sure when that's going to land, but when it does, I'm watching the thread to test it out.
So I think the compiler is now up to date with export data as of about yesterday morning. But if you find any bugs, let me know.
We have not yet. We have not yet switched to the default, though. Maybe that should be the marker that it's time for others to start expecting this to work.
Yeah, we've been waiting for that till after this meeting.
Okay. Maybe update the thread when that's ready for people to test.
The post has raised a hand.
Yeah. So on the general topic of export data, what is the sort of the current state? I mean, my vague sense was multiple years ago there used to be multiple readers of export data that needed to be updated independently, and it was sort of both a pain and a challenge to get 100% correct. And my sort of vaguer sense is also that, like, I don't even know, 2 years ago, a year ago, something like that, there was an effort to sort of consolidate. Like, if the compiler changes the export data, what sort of happens downstream today, currently in the modern world?
So your memory of the distant past is unfortunately not the very distant past. It's still rather current. So the compiler has a newer export data format that it allows us to represent both inline function bodies and generic sort of templates ready to be sort of instantiated. And so it has to have a richer format than what we need in tools. So the compiler has its own up-to-date format for all of that stuff, and has dropped all the previous formats. The xtools repo, including GoPlease, uses essentially an older variant that doesn't have as much of that data in it because we don't need it. And so there are indeed two export data formats that we have to keep up to date: the one in the compiler and the one in GoPlease. Plus, we also need to be able to read the compiler's one from xtools. So there's really two implementations in GoRoot. So we'll rather read a writer in GoRoot, read a writer of the older format in xtools, and a reader of the new format in xtools.
So basically, the compiler only generates the new format, but GoPlease, for its own purposes, continues to use the old format. Is that?
So read and write the old format. That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So and for something like escape analysis data, to pick an example, right? That's something that I think the compiler does record in export data. But is that an example of, well, GoPlease doesn't really care about that, exactly, and therefore it may not be there in GoPlease. So changing from so I guess, yeah, part of I'm just trying to confirm my understanding with a couple follow-up questions. So, for example, if the compiler was to change its own format, sort of the new format, which or as you're terming it, and really there are no downstream consumers of that currently today outside of the compiler.
That's not quite true. Remember, xtools has a reader and writer for the old format, but it also has just a reader for the
reader for the new format. Okay, yeah. No, you
and that's needed because if you run the Go packages package, then it needs to be able to, in some modes, read the export data from the compiler rather than type checks from source code.
Okay, maybe last 10 seconds on this. Is there any, in the new format, is there any way to like squirrel away information that the compiler reads and writes, but that xtools would just skip over? Like, is there any sort of like extensibility section, or is there some like JSON sitting somewhere that is opaque to xtools? Or
it does have a lot of data that xtools doesn't bother reading, but like, for example, the bodies for inline functions or generic templates, we don't, and as you mentioned, escape analysis, there is a lot of information in there that we don't read. I wouldn't say that it's a sort of easily extensible format. It just happens to be a big soup of, it's just an object graph, and some of the subgraphs we just don't bother deserializing.
And you're able to skip over without ever understanding the details of certain sections. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, so that's related to, I guess, tangentially related to the topic at hand and related to a couple other things, but that was very helpful. Sorry for the brief diversion.
No, these are good questions.
Yeah, and related to tools, I'll say, but maybe not exactly the.
Very much so, I'd say. No, these
I'll
are
stop
totally
talking.
very much
I'll
on
say
topic.
there's one more thing I wanted to add to this topic, which is that in your memory, you may also recall that there used to be additional readers outside of XTools. And I think with generics, we finally broke those sufficiently that people stopped writing their own readers and writers. And I think one could say the same thing about the complexity of importing and exporting aliases. And I think our stance on this is now don't try to write your own importer or exporter, because the GoTypes APIs are sufficiently finicky that it's just really too difficult to get right. So if you have a need for additional information in the export data, you should talk to us about how we can either make that happen or talk you out of it.
Yeah, I guess my last comment on this is it would be maybe this already exists, but some 4-sentence paragraph that included 3 outbound links that lived in command compile readme or some hacking document or something. I've poked around and looked for this, but have failed to find it. But it might just be I failed to find it, or it might be that it doesn't totally exist. But something short, similar to what you all said, with a few links to hey, here's an implementation of this and that, would, I think, help people in the external community who are interested in either reading or writing or modifying. It would help me at least.
Yeah, I think it would help us too, actually. So I'll do that.
Sorry,
Yeah, and I saw Dominic give a thumbs up. So that's the first time Dominic has ever agreed with me on anything. So I'm glad I have my camera off, because I'm currently doing a small little dance.
I don't buy it. Where did you say the best place for that documentation would be?
I mean, I threw out there's a command compile readme, right? If command compile is the main writer of it, especially the new format, then that's an example of where it could live. But maybe there's some other hacking document somewhere. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's a markdown document in source command compile, which has various little tidbits that are very helpful. Yeah, and it doesn't cover all the details. It sort of introduces you to the topic and gives you pointers for more details, which is a reasonable way to start, at least. Anyway, thank you very much. Helpful.
Skipping over my question in chat because I think I'm talking nonsense. I think Robert has 3 sections to talk about, so I'll let him go.
Thanks. These are, I think, all going to be brief because they're just all sort of updates of the update nature. So I'll just go through them. The first one is something that I think, Dan, you've discussed on the issue. You commented on the issue, but just for awareness, this is a big change for us. Starting with Go 123, we're going to require the latest version of Go to build Go Please. This has been a long time coming. We were going to wait until 124 when we could rely on the forward compatibility for the last 4 versions, which was our nominal support policy. But it's just been too much of a pain, especially with forward compatibility. In fact, we've had too much of difficulty supporting multiple Go versions, and this will really help us, and I think help us deliver something better for our users. Yeah, so once 123 comes out, we'll set the go.mod file to use 123.0, and anyone on 121 or later should be automatically updated. I don't expect this. I mean, there's discussion on the issue about the decision-making process. I don't expect this to cause too much disruption. I noticed that like Static Check also already upgrades their, I think a lot of tools already upgrade their go.mod file when new versions of Go come out. And I think this is a great policy for the tools community to sort of always be building at latest. The next one is a telemetry update. We're proceeding with our telemetry work. We've just recently rolled out a prompt in VS Code. It was at 0.1% of users get prompted to enable telemetry. They get asked if they want to opt into telemetry. We've rolled that out to 1%. That hasn't hit yet. It should be we should be seeing those results in the next few weeks. And we're continuing to sort of work on the implementation itself and think about ways that we can use telemetry. I will say it's been super useful for us already. Alan added some, I mean, we've had various bug reports instrumented in GoPlease for a while, but Alan also added facilities in 123 to have automated crash reporting. So like there's a new runtime set crash output API that we use. And that has already found, like, even though we have very, very few users who are on the combination of 123 and opt-in telemetry, we have already gotten some useful data from that. So that's really exciting for us. And then the last item here is another one of our priorities for 2024, which may be of interest. Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
This may be a silly question because I haven't followed set crash output very closely, but you sort of need another process to notice those files, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So basically the idea is that the runtime has a new API called set crash output, which takes a file descriptor or rather an os.file and then dupes that and holds onto it forever. And then if the program crashes, it basically writes its dying gasp to this file descriptor in the usual format that you've indicated through the go traceback variable. So if you set that to go traceback equals system, you get the full dump with all the program counters. So then you need somebody at the other end of that pipe who's able to interpret that. And the problem is not only that you need another process, but you could write it into the file system or through a pipe to another process, but the other process needs to be the same executable because only the same executable has the correct symbol table for that thing. And so the current design means you essentially have to fork the program, and then the child becomes the monitor for the parent. And then when the parent dies, the child is able to interpret that stack through the symbol table and then do something with the results, like stick it in a database. So it's a little bit annoying, frankly, but it works. And I would like us to switch to a JSON-based dump format on this output, and I propose to do that before the next release. So that any process at least doesn't have to be the same executable. Any process could make sense of that crash dump.
You can fork in Go. My assumption was always that the runtime didn't like you forking.
I meant fork and exec. If I said fork, I meant fork and exec.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it's. I hope we get that into 123, but either way, it's been super useful already. And then the last item is just for awareness that it is on our radar, in our plans for 2024 to work on better refactoring tools, or at least laying the foundations for better refactoring tools. So for the Go distribution, this means finally fixing floating comments in the AST, and maybe working on parser recovery a bit, as well as a few other small fixes. And then outside of standard library, this means just essentially building up our refactor, extract, and inline operations in GoPlease and surrounding tools. So right now we're still working on yes, and GoFix is something like that is in the plans. So we have the inliner that Alan wrote in the fall, the source inliner. And that lays the foundation for a lot of inlining type refactoring and a lot of like automatic API upgrades, things like that. And we will eventually expose those in a command line tool, but we're not quite sure exactly how that would work. But probably not RF, not something like RF. I'm not exactly sure what the semantics will be, but nothing quite so extensible as RF. That's my guess.
Although we do hope that the work of building many more refactorings will inform us on what RF should one day become.
So if anyone has opinions, I think there's discussion happening on the floating comments issue, and I think Alan has have you filed? I have not yet filed a proposal for the new form of the API, but we will do so.
I need to convince myself fully that it does everything we want, but yes, I will do a proposal.
But if you're interested in refactoring or writing quick fixes, this is a good time to revisit the topic.
The question is, where's the discussion happening? The answer is there's really nothing to discuss right now because nobody's working on it at all, and it's just on our to-do list, but not at the top of the to-do list. When the time comes, which I hope will be in the next month or so, there will be I have a pending change sitting there. I can find it. It's one of my pending CLs that does essentially the design I think is most promising for extending the AST with comments in the tree. I need to do more measurements on it. I need to make sure all the tools work with it and just do more sort of kicking the tires. And if I'm happy with it, then I will create a proposal to add that into the standard library for the Go 123 release.
Cool. On to the next section. There's just an item of mine. I wanted to briefly mention 63399. It's a fairly minor one, but basically we were trying to test that iterator types that we wrote with Go 122 would work with 123 when iterator functions actually land, right? So we wrote a build tag that's effectively either 123 or Go experiment range func. But then when I am on 123, meaning master, it fails. Because what the compiler does is it effectively says, do all the build tag combinations require at least 123? And if so, enable the experiment. Right? But it misses the one option that is only enable the experiment, but not 123. So you can say it's a bit of a weird edge case that not many people run into. But if I want to test an experiment that's landing in master, so to speak, I want to write a build tag like that, right? Because if somebody's on 122, they should use the experiment build tag. So anyway, there's no way to make both cases work. And I wonder if I'm just holding it wrong.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer.
My intuition is that the compiler should be a little bit smarter. Like for something like range func, it should say, do all the build tag combinations either require 123 or the build tag or the experiment, right?
I don't know what the compiler does in this area, but our tools, which have to try and simulate the compiler, don't do anything as careful as looking at the experiment tags and then making inferences about Go versions from them.
Anyway, the issue does go into detail, so
Okay.
you can go and read it after. But it's a fairly minor one, but it's something that we run into in our code base.
Yeah, there are other bits of code in the standard library that, like the iter package, for example, has it's code that's conditional, and then I wonder what condition it uses. Is it just 123 maybe? I think take a look at the iter package, and maybe there's something you can follow from there.
I'm guessing there's nothing else under command Go since Brian left. But nothing under MISC, I think. And then it's Alan for the rest of them.
So what do I have here? Oh, there's two items. So the first is, I'll do a demo. I'll start with the dry one. We'll go to a demo. The first is essentially a continuation of the thing we sort of started talking about informally at the beginning of the meeting, which is that we're about to flip the flag for the standard library so that it starts to produce, Go types will start to produce types.alias values. And it so far has the type, but doesn't never instantiates it. So, or rather never creates instances of that type. So that means that if you have a type switch that doesn't have a case for types alias, it's going to break and it'll hit the default. And it could mean that other places in the code that just do a type assertion, like they're looking for a particular constructor, like a pointer or a named, will need to do extra work to strip off that alias constructor. Basically, you need to find all the type switches or type aliases and do something, and maybe nothing, but you need to think about it and then decide to do nothing. So if you have tools that use Go types, now is a really good time to do this audit. And it's unfortunately not a small amount of work, as we found. But if you have questions, please come to us because we've been through this recently. I propose to take a look at static check, which I think is probably the largest thing that needs some work. Some of our tests depend on it, and so one way or another, it will become part of my problem to deal with it. But maybe I should talk to Dominic afterwards to sort of see what needs to be done there. So heads up, this is going to change in the next day or two. So if you start using 123's Go types, you'll notice this behavior change. Next thing is more fun, which is just a feature that we recently added to Go Please. So I'm going to present my screen. How do I do that? Present. Okay, entire screen. You should be able to see my Emacs. Okay, so this is my GoPlease enabled editor, and we've had this issue for a long time that people want to do previews of their documentation while they're editing some doc comments from within their editor. So now there's a command which I've added to Emacs called go-doc. There's an equivalent command in all the clients, but basically what it does is it opens a web server in GoPlease, so it's serving both LSP but also a web server, and then in that web server it runs something essentially the same as, not the same as, but essentially the same as the package.go.dev doc viewer. So you see a view of, in this case, the go/token package with essentially the same sort of markup and style for all the bits and pieces. And one quite neat trick is that in the web-based the package.go.dev version of this product, you see links through to the source code in codesearch.google.com. But here we don't want that because this is your private code. It's probably edited. It may not even be saved to the disk. So the links here, in fact, just pop you back into the editor at the right location. So you're seeing essentially a totally virtualized view of the file tree, the same that the LSP server uses is now sort of available for the web browser as well. So this is sort of a neat feature in its own right, but it's also the beginning of various other things that we can hope to do, where we have type information, for example, integrated into this thing. We could have profile views of your code just pop straight up into the browser. There's a number of things I think we can do with this, even refactorings, where it needs to ask you a question in the middle, which is very hard in LSP. We might pop up a browser window and say, I have some questions before I complete this refactoring, and then you would hit apply, and then the code would be edited. So I think there's a lot of things we can do with this, and so have a look at it when you have a moment. There was a question, but I missed it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that was me asking, how does the linking back to the editor work if
Good question.
the file is not even on disk?
So when you click this link here, a small piece of JavaScript sends like an asynchronous HTTP request to the GoPlease web server, and the side effect of that is for GoPlease to send a down call using LSP to get your editor to navigate to the relevant location. But the problem is, of course, if you kill the LSP service, if I restart it with this command, sorry, I can't actually see my editor because it's up that way. So if I restart the server, what you notice is that the page is no longer able to make that kind of connection anymore. So we pop up a little dialog just to tell you like it's not going to work. But basically, it requires that it's sort of connected to the same LSP session as the editor. That's my demo.
Would there be any reason to run package site locally at this point, or is what GoPlease does pretty much what anybody would need?
So the reasons to run package site locally it would give you like the ground truth of what you get, and it was the same executable. The problem is it was slow. It required to be saved through the file system. It had like a 20-second download, I think, to pull so the stood for, on the first load. It wasn't consistent with what you had in your unsaved editor buffers, and it couldn't do the trick that I just showed you of kind of navigating your editor to the location. We had planned to do that, but it turned out to be really rather complicated going through two processes to make this work. So in the end, I just realized that the actual amount of code to render, at least this slightly crappy simulation of package.go.dev, is only a few hundred lines of code, and I'll probably regret this years from now when I find that it's expanded to 10,000 to achieve feature parity with all the details I have glossed over. But it really isn't so much, and I think this turned out to be the sort of much simpler design overall. So that's why we did it this way. So I think package.go.dev will still be something you can run as a sort of a private instance within an organization, and we're doing work right now to sort of to both get the binary behind it to be sort of decoupled from all the cloud services that we use for the particular instance running in production. And also we're trying to get to a point where when you type go space doc, the subcommand of the go command for documentation, it obviously writes to the terminal by default, but if you were to give it an HTTP flag, it would do something very similar, pop up a browser window and then show you the rendered documentation in the canonical form. So we're hoping to still get mileage out of the same code base as package.go.dev. GoPlease is essentially doing its own thing. Sorry, I'm missing these comments. Did somebody see the question?
Yeah, somebody asked, does this hold GoASD, GoTypes, etc. for all packages in scope in memory?
It does what GoPlease does, which is it holds source files for your workspace in memory, but syntax trees, it holds the last 100 or something, just a LRU cache. Type information, it holds again an LRU cache, but essentially tries to relegate most of that information to the file system. So it's essentially a database with an in-memory cache, but with the ability to pull back all of the sort of stuff you might need rapidly.
So, the next comment is concern is monorepos. Well, GoPlease has problems with monorepos. So to the extent that GoPlease has problems with your repo, so will this. We would love to fix those problems if we have precise bug reports related to them. But I mean, GoPlease is essentially an optimized tool for pipe checking the code that you're looking at as fast as possible. And so that fits in nicely with this documentation viewer. It's also really cool that the documentation viewer has access to type information, whereas PackageSite does not. So there's a lot of stuff we can do with that we couldn't do before. Dan asks, are we getting enough telemetry data from monorepo users? I don't know. Probably not. We don't have any telemetry that we're currently approved for collection that would indicate whether or not a repo is a monorepo.
Yeah, exactly.
But the answer is probably not at this time.
Even knowing the number of packages in somebody's repo is sort of something that counts as their private data to us.
I don't. That's maybe a gray area, but suppose we did have telemetry that indicated the size of the repository. We have. It would be hard for us to correlate that with other observations.
Yeah.
I think Dominic just added an item to the agenda.
Oh, sneaky. So he's asking about 63982, GoTypes export API for unification.
I guess I should answer that. I think, is there bandwidth to look at this? Perhaps. I guess we would. Yeah, I think the only barrier to this getting done is a concrete proposal and bandwidth to implement it. Dominic, can you say anything about what you would want this API to do for you? Sorry if you said this in the issue. I'm trying to read simultaneously and page it into my memory. So in general, I think we intentionally avoided exposing APIs for type inference or unification, not because they wouldn't be useful, but because we were concerned about them hindering future extensions to unification and inference, and or the complexity of their implementation, maintaining the complexity of their implementation. So I think yeah, I think we're waiting for a solid use case that we need to support in order to motivate the API.
Even core type, which is one of the internal help functions in XTools, is an operation. We were thinking of adding it to the public API of core types, but there's another discussion in a separate proposal of eliminating the entire concept of core type, which I think tells you that sort of still the ground is not fully firm in this area.
Yeah, I mean, so we have the XX type params package, which exposes the same sort of utilities that we use internally to XTools. Unfortunately, we can't import from XX, so it's not exactly the same utilities that we use inside of XTools. But we do have some facilities for sort of walking a representation of a constraint. For unification, like it would be really difficult for us to produce anything outside of GoTypes because the algorithm is so complicated. Dominic says, really just a way to unify multiple types under a shared mapping of type parameters to types. It's useful for unused analysis in static check to see if a type implements any instantiation of an interface. There may be a trick for that. I have to think about that for a second. Sometimes there's tricks through which you can instantiate an interface with a specific type to ask questions about implementation constraints.
Your last comment on the issue, Rob, says unification is actually a fairly simple thing to be added to the API.
Yeah, I think so. I will think about this, and I will add a comment to the issue with my current best guess for what we can do. Yeah, I think I'm reading my last comment. I think the point is that unification is sort of an algorithm, and we can expose that algorithm. Inference is sort of an art, and it would be very tricky for us to expose that art. Like you have to, it depends on the order of operations, and it depends on a very clean specification for the inputs into inference, which may change over time. So that would be really difficult for us to expose in an API.
I think we're pretty much done then. So I started looking at the calendar for the next call and continuing the trend of roughly every couple of months. How's the 12th of June? Another Wednesday, same time.
Works for me.
And to be clear, that would be 4 p.m. UK time, which should be 3 p.m. UTC because of DST. And middle of June puts us a month before general development for 124. So it's right before the planning stage. So I think we can aim for talking about 124.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool. So see you all in 2 months.
Great. Thanks, Daniel.